There's a lot of blame being doled around by the fans for the Astros, just kind of underwhelming performance over the first quarter of the season. And fair or unfair, Jeff Bagwell's taken a lot of those bullets because he kind of was the face, the mascot, if you will, of the team during a period in which they did not have a general manager, and some deals got done. Those deals being most notably Jose Abreu, Rafael Montero, and to, I guess, a lesser extent, maybe Michael Brantley. I guess I'll just put it this way. If we're playing the blame game, is it fair to put it on any one person, or is this really a culmination of some decisions and really performances?
I mean, you got to think that really, like, Click had to go. It was that bad. You won a World Series with the guy. Look what he did with the bullpen. It makes me look at it a little bit with Crane and maybe Bagwell. We don't know the dynamics of what was going on behind the scenes, but we did hear that Crane and Click maybe didn't get along great. He left, and they're operating a little differently. I brought up Keith Law in the video I did last week with Granado about just how teams like Tampa, they don't spend top-tier free agent money on DHs and first basemen. They have guys that can kind of play those roles, maybe younger guys that can fill in those spots. You want to use the lower tier of free agency to fill first base and DH because it's not hard to find guys that can just swing the bat, and the defense isn't as important for those positions. So it's not kind of how the Astros have done things. So you have to wonder, why change what's working? That's probably what has Astros fans so curious about that. And all the bullets Bagwell's taken, it was because he was the face of it. He was the one talking about it to the media. And what we're doing videos about, are you okay with him being the new GM of the Astros? I mean, that was a real conversation. Him and Brad Ausmus, it came down to them and Dana Brown. And we were thinking it was going to go with one of these baseball men and, Reggie Jackson's influence with the Astros. So, I mean, Crane, Bagwell, I mean, all these guys have to be accountable for these things. But, with Brantley, was that Bagwell or is, Jim Crane going to probably bring Brantley back anyway? We know they had a great relationship. So, I mean, I think it's fair to spread the blame around a little bit.
If blame is to be apportioned, there's that expression, a fish rots from the head first. Fish actually don't rot from the head first, but it works for the expression. Jim Crane's a big fish. Right? He's the guy who ostensibly fired the general manager who rounded out a World Series winning roster with some good moves. Crane's prerogative, of course. He has the most gold, makes the rules. He's the operating owner of the franchise. But they had a bad offseason. And it's not necessary to take it from me or Josh or Brandon. Dusty Baker on the record. Well, we didn't have a general manager, so we couldn't do anything in terms of maybe adding an innings-eating veteran, fortifying some depth for rotation options heading into the season. It's not all 2020 hindsight on Jose Abreu, who's an unmitigated disaster to this point. For the last time, he woke up basically a year ago today, batting 197 with an OPS of sub 600, and it turned out just fine. But he really looks cooked, right? 0 home runs. Has he hit one to the warning track yet, much less the Crawford boxes? At Minute Maid Park, he's laid on pretty much every fastball. But he was coming off a good season, even with the power outage. 1 home run his last 55 games, 0 through the Astros' first 40 games this season. But he wasn't a joke of a player. He's a way better player than Yuli Gurriel last year. Yuli, by the way, now with a sub 700 OPS in his part-time role with the Marlins. While I'm meandering, Carlos Correa, sub 700 OPS with the Twins. George Springer, worse OPS than both Gurriel and Correa. So it's not exactly misery loves company, but the halcyon days, if the Astros only still had Springer and Correa and Yuli. Well, they still have 3 holes in their lineup. Montero was an overpay. 3 years was odd. Off 1 good season in the major leagues for a guy already in his 30s. But the price of poker, right? The Astros bullpen was awesome. So they wanted to keep the band together. If you overpaid some, it wasn't 7 years, $180 million. San Diego Padres re-upped the reliever Robert Suarez, also 31 years old last season. Also had his first good season in the major leagues. He'd been in Japan for a few years, Venezuelan pitcher. Padres gave him 5 years, $46 million. He has a bum elbow. He hasn't pitched yet this season. 5 years, 46 million, 3 years, 34.5. If not two peas in a pod, well, 2 32-year-old pitchers so far not doing the job this year. But that's not sinking your ship for years. And the price of poker in Major League Baseball, crazy contracts being dealt out all over the place. Every team is going to have one or two that you go, oops, or that's not what we were thinking. But when the Astros had a mediocre first quarter of the season and their biggest acquisition and their biggest re-sign have just been down in flames so far, it's glaring. Bagwell, 36-year-old broken down first baseman that he was with a goatee. Maybe he was seduced by all those characteristics in Jose Abreu. But Crane let the offseason go, the bulk of the offseason go, before he hired Dana Brown. So in that blame game, if there's a percentage to be allotted, Jim Crane, to me, would get about 75% of it. But, it's not like Rome is burning and, they're without an opportunity to turn the season around or make upgrade moves. It's just been, by Astros standards of the last half decade plus, not accustomed to seeing this around here.
When every season, though, is judged by World Series or bust, then it does seem like Rome is burning when things are not going as they have been, because that's the standard at which you hold. Is you're either, you're the reigning champs. You've been to 6 straight league championship series. That's the goal. Is you win the big chip or it doesn't really matter. And that's fair or unfair. I mean, they're the ones who set that completely high, unattainable bar for themselves that they continue to live up to. And Charlie, to your analogy, if you've ever owned a fish, there's a condition called fin rot, in which it definitely does not, by definition, it doesn't start at the head, it starts at the fin. At the end of the day, Jim Crane, he's having a tough time dodging those Jerry Jones comparisons right now, because it's all well and good until you start making yourself the face of the organization and you start making these decisions that are highly criticized and under the microscope. And again, are those the decisions, the reasons why the Astros are in the condition they're in? Not necessarily. I think they're just augmented by the fact that you made those decisions and not other ones. You made the Montero decision, but you allowed Christian Vasquez to walk, so you had opportunities to maybe solidify or maybe retain people, and you haven't. Charlie, your Carlos Correa analogy is a great one. You know who else is feeling great about that too? Is the Mets and the Giants, who dodged major bullets in giving Carlos Correa a giant contract. How do you think those guys feel knowing that they were on the hook for big money, and they clearly saw something that they didn't like in those ankle x-rays or whatever it was that they saw? Those guys feel like geniuses right now dodging that bullet. And again, I don't want to make light of it. It sucks for Correa. We like Correa. But the point being is sometimes conditions are such into where decisions are highly focused in on and under the microscope. And Dusty augments, for the Astros, Dusty Baker kind of augments some of these issues, right? Because he can put a lot of faith into guys, or try to instill faith by not moving them or not adjusting to their performances. Montero keeps getting run out in the setup role. Jose Abreu, until very, very recently, until being brought back from his day off, they would not move him out of the cleanup spot. Now he's been moved down to the 5 spot. It remains to be seen whether he gets moved any lower. Obviously, based on his performance, a meritocracy would dictate that he gets moved lower if not being removed. But they're committed to him, and whether it was, it may not be a 7-year deal, but a 3-year deal at this point for Abreu, and to a lesser extent Montero, does feel like a 10-year deal. And I just want to know, from your standpoint, Charlie, Dusty is seen as this old school baseball guy. Are you surprised to see Dusty Baker keep running out guys and putting them in those same positions and not adjusting to their performances? We'll start with Abreu, but I think to a lesser extent Montero. Are you surprised to not see Dusty make adjustments there?
Not wildly surprised. because I think it's unfair for those who say the Astros won the World Series in spite of Dusty Baker. Certainly fair to say they didn't win it because of Dusty Baker. They won it with Dusty Baker. Over his long and distinguished managerial career, he's never been known as a master tactician, and he's been a handler of people, the day-to-day, esprit de corps, and so forth. He's veteran loyal to a fault. We've seen some of that around here. The Maldonado playing time breakdown. Dubon, by Dubonian standards anyway, elevated his game while David Hensley was just awful. So, Dubon got all that run at second base, but still putting him in the leadoff spot when he's drawn 4 walks and near 150 at bats. But Dusty's hands are tied right now with some of his alternatives. There are only so many buttons you could push when a couple of your key guys are not performing well, and at least one other substantial player hasn't played at all. I do think fundamentally it was old school to the point of being doofy that, I have to split my lefties. I don't care that Abreu, if he fell out of a boat, he's not hitting any water whatsoever, but I by all means, I have to go Jordan, Abreu, Tucker over the weekend in Chicago, whether someone shook him or someone pointed out the OPS column or the home run column or said, I test Dusty. You want old school? Look at Abreu. His OPS is 50 points worse than Maldonado's now. He was still hitting 5th. But you look at the bottom 4 guys in the lineup, there's no one who cries out, well, that's a guy who should be batting 5th, other than you could say, well, anyone should be batting ahead of Abreu at this point. So Dusty will always do some things that confound, but I don't think managerial decisions explain why the Astros are 21-19, which is not calamitous. And they start the week 4 games behind the Rangers. If the Astros, with a few soft series coming the rest of May, and then back to some division play in June, they go 24-16 over the next 40, which doesn't sound like world beating, but that's good. That's 600 baseball, but not some incredible stretch. Well, if they go 24 on top of the mediocre 21-19, you're at the halfway point with 45 wins. You're on pace to win 90. Now, this year, if the Rangers are going to win 91, 90 might not get a wild card in that American League East. And there are 5 teams in that division. They all have better records than the Astros do. So I get angst. I get Sturm and Drang. And I will say the reality is the Astros are in all likelihood on the down slope of this era of awesomeness. But like the Golden State Warriors, well, they're past their peak level, but they ain't dead yet. Now, for this season, all right, the Lakers put the Warriors into the deep sleep, but no one's thinking that next year Golden State is going to be lousy. But they're just another contender. Well, maybe that's where the Astros project this year, next year. In contrast to the Dodgers, the Dodgers farm system's great. The Astros farm system is weak. So if you're going to be the regenerating Hydra, Dana Brown, starting with the draft next month, where his imprint really needs to be made in this organization, is in refortifying the pipeline of talent. It's going to be a real tough standard to, over a 3-4 year stretch, elevate Springer, Bregman, Correa, and young pitching to the major leagues. But if your farm system's 24th out of 30, MLB Pipeline's updated 100 prospect rankings, the Astros have 1. Drew Gilbert at number 96. So it's either going to get prohibitively expensive, and even if Jim Crane said, I'm going to be the Padres, I'm going to be the Mets, you can't go out and just get every free agent you want. And there's also a finite number of free agents who can be true difference makers for a ball club. So the Astros are still a pretty good roster, it seems, once you get Altuve back and they have no more pitching injuries. But this is no longer a great roster.
No, and now that we're at the quarter point in the season, it's a fair time to just kind of have an honest assessment of where you are. Charlie mentioned it with Maldonado. I mean, we were complaining about him catching and hitting like this. Abreu's worse. Only in batting average is Abreu better than Maldi right now. He's higher in on-base percentage, slugging, OPS. And at the end of the day, you're paying Abreu to hit. You're playing Maldi to catch. I mean, that's what's killing you right here. And I pulled some stats here, as Charlie mentioned also. Right now, the Astros, as they're sitting today, they're 3rd worst in OPS. They're 4th worst in slugging. when I look at last year, for everybody that's like, oh, it's early, it's still early, don't worry about it. Well, I filtered just the pre-All-Star break Astros last year. Slugging, they were 5th. OPS, they were 6th. So even in that sample size of just before the All-Star break, the Astros had risen above to where they were an elite offensive team. And now they're one of the worst offensive teams in the league. So we have to be real about that. And if you have to put a righty between Tucker and Yordan, it's Jeremy Pena. Right now, he's your best right-handed hitter that has any thump in the lineup. Hopefully Bregman will come around. I know Pena strikes out a lot, but so does Yordan. So does Abreu. So do a lot of guys that have power in their bat. So I'm not saying that they should do that, but if Dusty's going to insist on a right-hander splitting those two guys, it should be Pena.
Offense is up so far this season in Major League Baseball, and typically the offense picks up. You get to the warmer summer months, right? No more shifts, the small factors of larger bases, an historic success rate in stolen base percentage across Major League Baseball through the first quarter of the season. The Astros are scoring their fewest runs per game since 2014, which was the last time they had a team that sucked. This team certainly does not suck. But offensively, it's been more suck than stellar through the first 40 games.
I thought it was funny that over the weekend, the broadcasters were rooting for Yordan and Tucker because they know Dusty's aversion to the lefty-lefty lineup splits. And that's in spite of the fact that they are carrying two of the best lefties in the game whose splits don't dictate having that sort of fear over having lefty-lefty in the lineup. But it's, you know what? For as we can cherry pick points and be hypercritical of Dusty, it's so hard because for every anecdote like that you can point at, there's also what he did with the trust that he had in Yuli last year, and we were screaming from the rooftops, why do you keep batting Yuli where you bat him at? And then Yuli catches on fire at the exact right time in the postseason. And he's a big reason of why they were able to secure that second championship. And I guess lastly on this blame game topic, there's been a lot of debate over whether Montero has actually been bad or whether he's just been unlucky. Charlie, where do you fall on is Rafael Montero still a good pitcher? He's just running into some bad luck.
He's been bad with some bad luck thrown in. He's had a bloop drop in here and there, but he's probably also had a line drive caught here or there. Not everything should be judged by exit velocity. I give Dusty this one. He's more concerned with exit hits than exit velocity. Montero's given up something like 28 base runners in just over 15 innings pitched. That's lousy. You put that much traffic on the base paths, well, you leave yourself exposed to then a blue pit can drop in, score a run or two. I'm not going to say he's a bad pitcher yet. Right? The warning with Montero was he'd never had a good major league season of more than 30 innings anyway until last year. So in all likelihood, because he was phenomenal, that was his career year. He'll never have that good a season again. But that leaves plenty of room to still be a good relief pitcher. Maybe it's just a matter of recalibration. Right? Ryan Presley still makes it a little bit of an adventure, but he's the unquestioned closer. Well, their unquestioned best reliever pitcher is Brian Abreu. So if Abreu is the number 2 guy in the bullpen and you're getting decent work out of Neris, the clock doesn't strike on Phil Maton, maybe Montero gets into that role where he comes into games where the team's behind 3-2 in the 5th or 6th inning and you need a reliever and you're hoping he can hold the game together as opposed to high leverage situation after high leverage situation in the 8th inning. Because he's compromised them in probably 4 games. Right, a bad pitcher doesn't blow it every game, but what's your proportion of success compared to what you would expect or hope for out of the role in which you're being used? And Montero's not cutting it. Of course, you can't use Abreu in the 8th, Presley in the 9th every day, but you have Neris. Maybe Maton has earned a short-term promotion to a couple later inning spots because Montero is pretty messed up right now.
Yeah. And when you get in those situations and you keep not performing, you keep getting thrown in the 8th inning and you keep giving up runs, that stuff gets in your head a little bit. Then you start expecting to struggle out there. So Dusty needs to get his arms around this thing before he's in his head, and there's no going back.